Lagos at night has its own heartbeat. The clubs throb with music, the streets glow with restless headlights, and in the corners of the city where champagne flows, secrets are born. Stella was no stranger to this world. She dressed like a promise, figure-hugging gown, perfume that lingered, and eyes that could make a man forget his own name. That night at Velvet Room, she wasn't searching for love. She was searching for opportunity. Richard sat in the VIP lounge, detached from the noise. A man of power, but carrying the weariness of unspoken battles. He had money, connections, influence, but also an emptiness that wealth couldn't fix. His wife, Adana, was his anchor. But years of waiting for a child had left a hollow place in his heart. When Stella glided past his table, pretending it was by chance, the air shifted. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, temptation found its opening. Stella didn't waste time. She leaned close, her laughter soft, her words deliberate. Richard told himself he'd leave soon, but instead he ordered another drink. They talked about the absurdity of Lagos traffic, the madness of business, the exhaustion of carrying too much responsibility. Two strangers, connected by the thrill of being seen. The attraction grew like fire under dry wood, silent at first, then undeniable. When Richard suggested stepping out for air, Stella followed. Outside, the night breeze carried their silence. A black car waited, sleek and tinted. Richard hesitated for 1 second, but Stella touched his arm lightly, and that was enough. They entered together. The driver pulled away, Lagos lights flashing like a secret code through the glass. No words needed. Both knew where they were headed. At a quiet hotel tucked away in Ikoyi, they disappeared into a room. What happened inside wasn't love, it was escape. Two people stripping away responsibility for a few reckless hours. The city outside moved on, but in that room, laughter echoed, whispers drowned the silence, and choices turned into actions that could not be undone. Richard wasn't himself that night. Stella wasn't just another woman. Together, they crossed a line both knew should never have been touched. By morning, the spell had broken. Richard dressed quickly, his face heavy with regret. He left money on the dresser. Stella didn't touch it. This never happened, he muttered, avoiding her eyes. He walked out into daylight like a man racing against his own guilt. To him, it was a mistake to bury. To Stella, it was an opportunity carved in gold. Lying on the hotel bed, Stella smiled faintly. She had seen the watch on his wrist, the way the staff treated him with deference, and the quiet confidence of a man used to power. This wasn't just a fling, it was a door. One night of passion had given her a name, Richard, and with it, the spark of a dangerous plan. She wasn't going to let it fade, not when it could change her life forever. Stella's plan began like a seed, small but dangerous once planted. She knew Richard would never willingly let her into his life. He wasn't desperate, and he wasn't the type to flaunt women around. That made him harder prey, but also more valuable. So, she sharpened her tactics. With the precision of a chess player, she staged her next moves. Casual sightings, strategic calls from hidden numbers, and mysterious text messages designed to keep his memory of that night alive. At first, Richard ignored her. He was a man who had made many mistakes before, but this one he wanted to bury. But Stella wasn't ordinary. She had studied men like him. She knew their guilt, their pride, and their weaknesses. Then one day, Richard's phone buzzed with a message that shook him. "We need to talk. I'm late. This is bigger than you think." Richard froze. His heart raced. Late? He knew exactly what that meant. In that moment, silence swallowed him whole. The thought of a child should have filled Richard with joy. But in his marriage, that joy was a wound. For years, he and his wife had prayed, consulted doctors, and hoped for a miracle. To now have another woman claiming pregnancy was like a cruel knife twisting into that wound. He deleted the message, but couldn't delete the fear crawling under his skin. That evening, when his wife welcomed him home with her usual warm smile, Richard felt the weight of a secret he couldn't share. Meanwhile, Stella perfected her role. She bought prenatal vitamins, attended a clinic under a false name, and even saved ultrasound images from the internet. She created a story so believable that anyone would doubt their own instincts. To her, it was business, nothing personal. But what Stella didn't know was that in Richard's home, his wife was not just a silent partner. She was observant, intelligent, and a woman with access to resources Stella couldn't imagine. Richard's wife, Adana, had sensed something was wrong. She noticed his sudden mood swings, the way his hands trembled when he read messages, the unease in his eyes. At first, she thought it was stress from work. But Adana was the daughter of a billionaire, raised in a world where deceit wore fine suits and betrayal came with expensive perfumes. She knew the smell of lies. She decided not to confront Richard, not yet. Instead, she quietly began her own investigation. One evening, Richard received a bold message from Stella. "You can ignore me, but you can't ignore your child. Meet me or I'll come to your wife." Panic set in. Richard agreed to meet her, hoping to settle the matter quietly. They met at a private cafe. Stella appeared radiant, wearing a fitted dress that emphasized her supposed pregnancy. She smiled like a victor claiming her prize. Richard stared at her, torn between anger and fear. She slid an envelope across the table, fake medical reports confirming the pregnancy. Richard's world felt like it was collapsing. What he didn't know was that just 2 tables away, Adana sat with dark sunglasses, quietly watching. She had followed him, determined to uncover the truth. And as she observed Stella's performance, her lips curled into a faint smile, not of weakness, but of a woman ready to fight. Stella thought she was weaving a perfect web, but she had just walked into a lioness's den. Adana had always been the picture of elegance and calm, the kind of woman who commanded respect without raising her voice. But beneath that calm exterior was a sharp mind trained by years of watching her father run an empire where betrayal was the language of rivals. As she sat quietly at the cafe, watching her husband and Stella, her heart burned, but not with tears. No, Adana wasn't the type to break down at betrayal. She was the type to strategize. When Richard returned home that night, guilt hung on him like a heavy coat. He tried to act normal, but Adana noticed the way he avoided her eyes, the way he lingered in the study longer than usual. She didn't confront him. She kissed his cheek, served his dinner, and let him steal in his silence. In her mind, she whispered, "Don't worry, Richard. I will handle this for both of us." The next morning, Adana began digging. She called a private investigator she trusted, a man her family had used for years. Within days, he traced Stella's name, her background, and even her history of targeting wealthy men. Pictures, phone records, social media footprints, it all painted the portrait of a woman who was a professional predator. Adana studied them like a surgeon studying X-rays, her resolve hardening with each revelation. Stella thought she had chosen her prey well, but what she didn't know was that this time she had bitten into iron. Meanwhile, Stella grew bolder. She began sending Richard more threatening messages. "If you don't settle me, I'll show up at your office. Your wife will soon know." Her confidence grew with every unanswered call, believing she had Richard cornered. She didn't notice the subtle tale that followed her every move. The investigator snapping pictures, recording conversations, and collecting evidence. To Stella, the game was simple. Play the victim, reap the reward. But the stage she thought she controlled was already rigged against her. Richard, on the other hand, was drowning. At work, he snapped at his staff. At home, he avoided his wife's questions. At night, he barely slept, haunted by the thought of a scandal that could destroy his marriage and reputation. He didn't know that Adana already had the truth in her hands, and instead of falling apart, she was plotting. She wanted Stella to feel the weight of fear, the taste of her own medicine. But Adana was patient. She knew a trap is best set when the prey feels most comfortable. One evening, Stella decided to turn up the heat. She called Richard, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I need money for hospital checkups. Do you want your child to suffer?" Richard nearly broke down. He considered confessing everything to Adana, but shame held him back.
Richard nearly broke down. He considered confessing everything to Adana, but shame held him back. He transferred money, hoping it would buy her silence. What he didn't know was that Adana had quietly traced the transaction. Every move he thought was hidden was already an open book to her. By the time Stella counted the money with a satisfied grin, Adana was already steps ahead. She wasn't just going to expose Stella, she was going to teach her a lesson that would leave scars. For Adana, this wasn't just about protecting her marriage. It was about sending a warning to every predator who thought they could prey on families. The lioness had awakened, and soon Stella would realize she had danced too close to fire. Stella believed she was winning. Every time Richard transferred money, she felt a surge of power. She bragged to her friends in hushed tones, claiming she had hooked a big fish. To her, it was only a matter of time before she secured a mansion, a car, and perhaps even a monthly allowance for keeping her mouth shut. But while Stella bathed in illusions of victory, Adana was quietly arranging her downfall. Adana's investigator returned with a thick file, pictures of Stella meeting different men in luxury hotels, bank records that didn't match her lifestyle, and even voice recordings of conversations where she admitted to faking pregnancies before. Adana studied them like a general preparing for war. She didn't want to simply expose Stella. She wanted to break the cycle, to make her a warning. Still, she waited, calm as ever, because she knew patience was the deadliest weapon. Richard, however, was falling apart. Every day, Stella grew bolder. She began hinting that she might pay Adana a visit if he didn't meet her demands. He drowned in guilt and fear, not knowing his wife already had everything under control. Richard had no idea that the woman he thought was being deceived was actually 10 steps ahead. Adana never let on. She still cooked for him, smiled at him, even asked about his day, but inside, her fire burned hotter with each passing moment. The first strike came in the form of an invitation. Stella received a mysterious message from an unknown number. "There is someone who wants to do business with you. A private dinner, very discreet, big money involved." Stella's greed danced to the rhythm of the words. She always believed luck favored her, and she didn't question the source of the message. To her, opportunities came when you lived boldly. She replied with excitement, never imagining she was stepping into a carefully laid trap. On the night of the dinner, Stella dressed to kill, a flowing gown, sparkling earrings, and a designer clutch bag, all symbols of the life she craved. She arrived at the luxurious private lounge expecting to meet another wealthy target. Instead, she was ushered into a room where Adana sat at the head of the table, calm and regal, sipping wine. The shock on Stella's face was priceless. She tried to mask it with a smile, but her hands betrayed her. They trembled as she clutched her bag. "Sit down, Stella," Adana said softly, her voice carrying more weight than any shout could. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Stella forced a laugh. "I don't know who you are," she lied, her eyes darting nervously. Adana leaned forward, sliding the investigator's file across the table. Pictures spilled out. Stella with other men, Stella accepting money, Stella holding a drink while talking about her fake pregnancies. The color drained from her face. Her mask was cracking. For the first time, Stella realized she wasn't the predator. She was the prey. Adana's eyes never left her. They weren't the eyes of a wounded wife. They were the eyes of a hunter who had finally cornered her target. And as Stella stared at the evidence spread before her, her heartbeat thundered in her ears. This wasn't just about Richard anymore. This was about survival. For a moment, Stella couldn't speak. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She stared at the damning pictures, the transcripts, the recordings. Each page was like a mirror reflecting her darkest secrets. The confidence she once carried like perfume had vanished, replaced by trembling hands and shallow breaths. Still, she tried to cling to the only weapon she had left, her lies. "This isn't what it looks like," Stella whispered, her voice barely steady. "People are trying to set me up. Richard, he knows the truth." But even as she spoke, she could feel the weight of Adana's eyes piercing through her falsehood. Adana didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Instead, she leaned back, her calmness more terrifying than any rage could have been. "You chose the wrong man, Stella," Adana said, her words cutting like glass. "You've been playing this game with men for too long, but this time you walked into a family you cannot destroy." She tapped the file gently, her manicured nails clicking against the table. "Do you know what happens when evidence like this lands in the hands of the police or the press? Your name, your face, your shame, everywhere." Stella's heart pounded. For the first time, fear replaced greed. Her empire of lies was collapsing, and there was no escape. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I'll disappear. I'll never bother him again. Just don't ruin me." The predator was gone. In her place was a desperate young woman clutching at mercy. At that moment, the door opened and Richard walked in. His face was pale, his eyes filled with confusion. He hadn't known that Adana would summon him here. He froze at the sight of Stella crumbling in her chair, the evidence sprawled across the table, and his wife sitting like a queen in her throne. "Adana," he muttered, shame dripping from his voice. He looked broken, trapped between guilt and gratitude. Adana's gaze flicked to him, sharp but calm. "Richard, sit down." He obeyed like a chastised child. For the first time, he realized his wife had seen everything all along. She wasn't the fragile woman he thought needed protecting. She was the fortress he had betrayed. His chest tightened with regret. How could he have doubted her strength? Turning her eyes back to Stella, Adana spoke again, her voice cold but measured. "I won't send you to prison, not yet, but I will make sure you learn that not every wealthy man is your prey. From today, you will pay back every kobo you've stolen, not to me, not to Richard, but to charities for women and children whose lives have been destroyed by greed and lies like yours. I will control your every step, Stella, and if you ever try to run, remember, I have the power to end your life as you know it." Stella's tears flowed freely now. She nodded, defeated. Richard buried his face in his palms, knowing he had nearly destroyed the very woman he was saving. And as silence filled the room, Adana's calm voice echoed like a prophecy. "In life, Stella, deception may give you quick gains, but it always ends in destruction. Remember that as you rebuild, if you survive." The air in the private lounge was heavy. Stella sobbed quietly, her mascara running down her cheeks. Richard sat with his head bowed, shame suffocating him, but Adana remained calm, her hands folded neatly on the table like a judge delivering a verdict. She had orchestrated everything perfectly, and now the stage was set for the final act. "You thought you could destroy my home with lies," Adana said softly, her words slicing sharper than a blade. "But Stella, you only exposed yourself. You prey on men who lack discipline, and you profit from their weakness. But every game has an end, and yours ends tonight." She paused, sipping her wine with the poise of royalty, before sliding her phone across the table. On its screen were pictures of Stella's other schemes, already drafted into a press release. Stella's eyes widened in horror. "No, please don't expose me. I'll do anything you want," she begged, her voice shaking. She fell to her knees in desperation, clutching Adana's gown. The hunter was now a beggar, her arrogance swallowed by fear. Richard finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Adana, I made a mistake, a terrible one. Please, whatever you do to her, don't let it destroy us too." His words carried guilt, but also relief. For the first time, he saw the true weight of the woman he had married. He realized that Adana wasn't just his wife. She was his shield, his wisdom, his fortress. Adana's gaze softened only slightly as she looked at him. "Richard, you broke my trust. That wound will take time to heal,
But I will not let a woman like this ruin everything we've built. This isn't just about you. It's about the lesson that must be taught." She turned her eyes back to Stella, who was trembling like a leaf in a storm. With a cold calm, Adana gave her orders. Stella would sign a binding legal agreement to surrender every naira she had extorted from men, funneling it into charities for women and children whose lives have been destroyed by greed and lies like hers. She will control her every step, and if she dared to slip back into her deceitful ways, Adana promised that the press, the police, and the courts would know every detail of her crimes. By the end of that night, Stella walked out not as a queen, but as a captive of her own greed, shackled by the consequences she had tried so hard to escape. Richard walked out broken, but humbled, his eyes finally opened to the strength of his wife. And Adana, she walked out taller than ever, her head high, her dignity intact, her power undeniable. In Lagos, whispers began to spread. Stella vanished from the club she once roomed, her beauty wasted on fear. Richard rebuilt his marriage brick by brick, carrying the weight of his betrayal, but also the gratitude of a second chance. And Adana became a silent legend, proof that not all wives are victims, that some women fight back with intelligence sharper than any weapon. The story of Stella is a warning. Greed may promise quick riches, deceit may offer temporary victories, but in the end, truth always has a way of rising. The hunter becomes the hunted, and the snare she sets for others becomes the same rope that binds her. Because in life, wealth is not the greatest treasure, integrity is, and those who trade it for greed will always pay a price they never planned for.